the second section of A Christmas Carol, we see Scrooge at work in his counting house, a kind of mid-accountancy, money-lending type place. Okay? Now, it starts by setting it up for us. It's afternoon on Christmas Eve. So Christmas Eve is it's coming towards Christmas, but the happiness in the counting house is not there. The word is described here as cold, bleak and biting weather, and later on that the fog is pouring in to the house at every way it can get in, which leaves the houses that are opposite so enveloped in fog that they look like phantoms themselves. Right, what are we seeing here? Well, we're seeing obviously a sense of what we know as pathetic fallacy, how the weather and the temperature are representing our view of Scrooge and how he feels. The coldness and the bleakness are clear, but it also suggests with biting a sense of aggression, that it's almost angry against things coming around us. Whereas the fog, of course, always suggests the idea of obscuring things so you can't see things clearly, like he can't see clearly the reality. This description of the houses not being able to be seen is, again, very effective in itself, but again, this supernatural idea of the phantoms is worth noticing. Now, we have a succession of people who then come into the counting house to see him and have encounters with him. Now, the first one is his nephew. Fred will find out later. He's introduced, interestingly, by his voice, as he is so many times in the book that we hear his voice first before it comes anywhere there, which kind of shows how cheerful he is. He's described as having a ruddy and handsome face, again a deliberate contrast, of course, to Scrooge. They then enter into a conversation about Christmas, wishing a Merry Christmas. Scrooge doesn't want anything to do with this. They joust about being poor and rich and the problems there, before we get over the page into the crux of this for us, which is where they exchange their views on Christmas. First of all, Scrooge tells us that he finds Christmas a complete waste of time. But what he tells us really is that it's basically a waste of time because it costs money and you don't gain money. So what we're seeing is that Scrooge's view of Christmas is all based on money. Now, that contrasts completely down when we get to the view that we get down here and over onto this page here from Fred, where he counters back what he thinks of Christmas. And what he's talking about instead is people. So we get Fred's view of Christmas being based not on money but on people, and that balance between people and money is going to be central to so much of this. It's worth noting some lovely phrases in what Fred says, and he's certainly much more poetic and much more convincing in what he says. But the idea of people opening their shut hearts freely is probably the most interesting here. The idea that people generally have shut up hearts, but this is the one time that they open them up to other people. It does criticise people in general, but also show the value of Christmas. Scrooge leaves, and it's important to notice that he leaves basically saying, I don't want anything of you. Why can't we be friends? He's inviting him to his Christmas party, and will continue to do every year. And of course, at the end, he leaves the room without an angry word. So Scrooge has no effect on Fred and his mood. What we then get is we get a couple of what is described as portly gentlemen, who are described as pleasant to behold. Once again, we have the opposite to Scrooge. he was described as kind of pretty ugly and unpleasant to behold, and even though he's rich, very pointy and angular, they're portly, which means slightly plump, basically because they're rich, and therefore they have money. Now, their point is that they're here to collect money for charity. They're very friendly, and they come in with the attitude that they expect generosity. They expect that people will do so because they kind of almost don't understand that anybody would be otherwise. Obviously, Scrooge isn't. And this is where we lead into Scrooge's famous bit about the prisons, about the workhouses, which you may want to look up if you don't understand, and the poor law in general. What we're seeing is that Dickens is taking this opportunity to use Scrooge's idea that basically there's things in place already which, as we can see, are awful, and the portly gentlemen point out that many would rather die than this, to attack the current system. Okay? Whereas Scrooge points out how he feels about the poor, he calls them idle people. That's how he feels. People are poor because they're lazy. Okay? And as it goes further on, I get a famous quote in which he says, if they would rather die, then let them do it and decrease the surplus population. That word surplus means basically too much, but the surplus is the stuff that could easily be creamed off the top. So basically, he sees them as unimportant at the same time. When they leave, realising they're not going to go anywhere, it's important to note that Scrooge doesn't just carry on, but he carries on with an improved opinion of himself. The idea that he feels he has done something right, he has succeeded in the way that he got rid of them. The temperature continues, the fog and the darkness thicken. Later on, the cold becomes more intense. So what we were introduced to, the pathetic fallacy, is getting worse. So as Scrooge gets worse, so does the cold and the fog and the dark. The cold, dark and fog, the three things that he is associated with. We get a number of descriptions of things going on around the place. It continues there, it gets foggier and colder on this side. But the next person to appear doesn't actually come in, but is a carol singer looking for money. But what we should notice is the reason the carol singer is there singing to try and get some money is because of what an awful state he is in. This is our first picture really of child poverty, of which we're going to get a huge amount more. And it's worth noticing that the cold is being described as mumbling in his bones, or mumbling on him, and gnawing on him like dogs gnaw on bones. So basically, what we are saying is children are essentially being described as being food for the cold around them. Worth noting, Scrooge's reaction is to take the ruler and run at the door as though he's going to beat him with it, which I think is best used in juxtaposition, remember putting two things next to each other for effect, with the words sung by the carol singer. God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay. Well, Scrooge, despite being blessed, isn't merry and is dismayed very easily. We then come to the end of the day. It's worth noting that Scrooge resents, with an ill will it says he gets down from his stool, resents stopping work. Work clearly and earning money is his life. Okay? And we get the final kind of confrontation, if you like, between him and his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who's not mentioned as Bob Cratchit yet, just as his clerk, but we'll get to know him as that later. Once again, poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. He calls the idea of giving him a day off. As we are seeing Christmas, once again, in terms of money. That's how Scrooge sees it. It's like having that is picking his pocket. But in complete contrast to his grumpiness, we have the only bit actually in the book, I think, as far as I am aware, where our perspective isn't through Scrooge, okay? It's where he goes down a slide on Cornhill at the end of a line 20 times. He is having fun. That's the contrast that we have